I was paying for slugs twice, first with my harvest, then at the register. A bottle of Sluggo, a spray for aphids, repeat every season. Then I stacked some logs, threw in some leaves and stones, and left it at the edge of my raised bed. A few weeks later, I stopped buying. Every spring it starts the same way. You walk out in the morning, crouch down by the lettuce, and there it is. Ragged holes in the leaves, slime trails across the soil, aphids already curled tight around the new bean shoots. And the reaction is automatic. You go to the store, you grab a bottle of Bonide insecticidal soap or a bag of Sluggo iron phosphate bait, you treat the bed, and for a week or two, things look better. Then it rains, or it warms up, and you're back at the shelf. That cycle isn't an accident. The garden pest industry doesn't sell you balance. It sells you a response, a repeatable product against a repeatable symptom. A 32O's ready-to-use aphid spray runs you anywhere from $8 to $23 depending on the brand. A 50 lb bag of Sluggo bait sits at around $179 on sites like Organic Approach. Those aren't one-time purchases. They're annual line items. And the reason you keep buying them is that the underlying problem never gets solved, only suppressed. Here's what actually keeps slugs and aphids in check in a functioning garden. Predators. Ground beetles, rove beetles, wolf spiders. These are the animals that hunt at night, patrol the soil surface, eat slug eggs, young slugs, soft-bodied insects, and aphids that fall from plants. They've been doing this for millions of years. The problem isn't that they don't work, it's that most modern gardens give them absolutely nowhere to live. When you rake every leaf, edge every bed to bare soil, and keep the garden looking like a catalog photo, you're not just cleaning up. You're removing the dark, damp, stable cover that ground-active predators need to survive the day. They need cool gaps under logs, flat stones, loose bark, leaf litter, places where they can hide from heat and desiccation and come out after dark to hunt. Without that, they don't stay. And without them, the slugs and aphids have the garden entirely to themselves. That's what the insect hotel in this video is actually about. Not the decorative bamboo and pinecone box from the garden center. That's designed for solitary bees and has nothing to do with this. What we're building is a ground-level shelter. Logs, flat stones, dry leaves, coarse bark, a thin layer of straw mulch. Ugly by design, functional by biology. Positioned at the edge of the bed where the damage is worst, in partial shade, where the soil doesn't dry out by noon. The University of Maryland Extension notes that ground beetles shelter under large stones, logs, and brush piles, and that light straw mulch and perennial plantings help them survive through cold and shelter-scarce periods. The Natural History Museum recommends building log piles in shaded, moist spots. Logs as the base, dry leaves packed into the gaps, bark as a top layer. That's almost exactly what we're putting together here, with one key difference. The goal isn't wildlife habitat as a concept. The goal is a permanent night shift of predators running patrols between their shelter and your crops. One module, roughly 2 feet long, a foot wide, about 10 inches high, placed a foot from the bed where you're losing plants. That's the starting point. And it costs less than a single bottle of spray. The phrase insect hotel does a lot of damage. It makes people picture a painted wooden box with little bamboo tubes and pine cone compartments. The kind of thing you hang on a fence post and photograph for Instagram. That's a solitary bee house. It's fine for what it is. But it has nothing to do with slug and aphid control, and confusing the two is exactly why most people who try this method get zero results. What actually works for predatory ground beetles is the opposite of decorative. No tubes, no elevation, no exposed south-facing wall baking in afternoon sun. Ground beetles, family Carabidae, are nocturnal, moisture-dependent hunters that spend their days in dark, cool, humid gaps at soil level. They don't need a cute facade. They need the same conditions that exist under a flat rock that hasn't been moved in 2 months. This isn't a new idea dressed up in sustainability language. Farmers in the UK have been using a scaled-up version called a beetle bank since the late 1980s. A permanent raised strip of tussock grass running through the middle of a crop field, designed to give ground-active predators somewhere to overwinter and spread out from in spring. A standard beetle bank is typically at least 6 feet wide and runs the length of a field. Research published in Agriculture, Ecosystems, and Environment by Collins et al. in 2002 found that fields with a beetle bank in the center had significantly lower cereal aphid populations than isolated plots with fewer polyphagous predators. That's a controlled field study, not a gardening blog. The home garden version doesn't need 6 feet of tussock grass. It needs a beetle bump, a low, dense structure about 2 to 4 feet long, 1 to 2 feet wide, and 6 to 12 inches high, placed no more than 3 to 4 feet from the bed you're trying to protect. Same principle, smaller footprint. The predators still need the same 3 things: cover from light and heat during the day, stable moisture, and a short route to their prey at night. What actually draws them in isn't any scent or bait. It's the physical conditions. Logs partially pressed into the soil, flat stones stacked with gaps between them, dry leaves packed into the hollow spaces, a thin layer of bark on top, a 2-inch border of straw mulch around the perimeter, not to trap moisture, but to buffer the temperature swing between day and night. Gardener's World specifically calls out stone piles as dark, moist daytime refugees for nocturnal beetles that emerge at dusk to hunt slugs and snails. That's the functional blueprint. The most common mistake is placing the structure somewhere visible and sunny because it looks intentional. For a beetle shelter, that's the worst possible choice. A structure that dries out by 10 a.m. won't hold predators through the day. And predators that leave the shelter early don't stay near your crops. Partial shade, ideally the north or east side of a bed, with morning light and afternoon cover, is the target. One correctly placed module near one problem bed. That's the test. Not a garden transformation. A single data point you can actually evaluate. So now you understand what the structure looks like and where it goes. The harder question is why it actually works. Because logs and leaves attract beetles and beetles eat slugs. Sounds like the kind of thing someone says at a farmer's market without being able to back it up. The mechanism is more specific than that, and understanding it changes how you build and where you place the shelter. Ground beetles are polyphagous predators. That means they don't specialize in one prey. They hunt whatever soft-bodied, slow-moving target crosses their path at night. Young slugs, slug eggs, aphids that have dropped to the soil surface, caterpillars, fungus gnat, larvae, cutworms. A review in Bioscience confirmed that carabid beetles can make a meaningful contribution to pest suppression in agricultural systems, but the outcome depends heavily on the spatial structure of the habitat around them. In plain terms, the beetle is capable, but it needs to be in the right place at the right time. Here's the sequence. During the day, the beetle stays under cover, logs, stones, bark, where temperature stays low and moisture stays stable. As the sun goes down and humidity rises, 2 things happen simultaneously. Slugs become active and move toward your crops, and ground beetles leave their shelter to hunt. They're not responding to each other directly. They're both responding to the same environmental trigger. That overlap is the control mechanism. It's not a predator seeking a specific prey. It's 2 nocturnal animals active in the same zone at the same time, and one of them eats the other. This is why the location of the shelter matters more than the size of it. A beetle bank placed 15 feet from a bed, with a dry open path between them, breaks that overlap. The beetle hunts near its shelter. If the crops aren't within easy patrol range, roughly 3 to 5 feet of moist, covered ground, the predator and the pest occupy different zones, and nothing changes. Now, the honest part. A 2022 study in Frontiers in Ecology and Evolution found that conservation tillage systems with more structural diversity had higher carabid abundance and better aphid predation in June compared to conventional plots. But a European research project evaluating carabid beetles, specifically as slug biocontrol, reported weaker than expected results against slugs, while showing better outcomes against caterpillars and cranefly larvae. That's worth saying clearly. This shelter won't eliminate a slug problem the way a contact pesticide claims to. What it does is apply consistent, nightly pressure on vulnerable life stages: eggs, juveniles, soft newly hatched slugs, which is exactly where chemical control is least efficient and most expensive to repeat. The other thing that can quietly undermine the whole setup: too much competing food near the shelter. If you pile rotting kitchen scraps next to the structure, beetles feed there and have no reason to range toward the bed. Research on polyphagous predators shows that alternative prey can reduce focus on any specific pest when food choices are abundant. The shelter is a base, not a buffet. Dry leaves, bark, logs, not decomposing organic matter. One more thing to calibrate expectations. The effect builds over weeks, not hours. The first night after you build it, nothing visible happens. That's not failure. That's how a biological system starts. Knowing the biology is one thing. Building something that actually functions instead of just sitting there looking rustic is another. Most beetle shelters fail, not because the concept is wrong, but because three specific details get ignored: moisture balance, material choice, and position relative to crops. Get those right, and the structure works. Get them wrong, and you've built a slug motel with great curb appeal. Start with the site. You want partial shade, morning sun, afternoon cover. The north or east edge of a raised bed is ideal. Avoid low spots where water pools after rain, and avoid open sunny patches near concrete or gravel that radiates heat. The soil underneath should stay slightly moist on a dry day without being irrigated. If it dries out completely by mid-morning, the location is wrong before you've placed a single log. The base goes down first. Use 3 to 6 logs or thick branches, diameter roughly 2 to 6 inches, length anywhere from 12 to 30 inches. Don't stack them tight. Press some directly into the soil surface and prop others at angles using stones or smaller branches. The gaps between them are the point. That irregular void space is where beetles shelter, and it needs airflow without exposure. Half-rotted wood is fine. Fully crumbled, powdery wood holds too much moisture and compacts into a damp mass that suffocates the structure from the inside. Fill the cavities with dry leaf litter, about half a bucket for a standard 2-foot module. Add a couple handfuls of loose bark and a thin layer of coarse wood chips if you have them. 1 small scoop of garden soil or age compost tucked between the lower logs gives microbial contact with the ground ecosystem. That's it for fill material. No kitchen scraps, no fresh grass clippings, no fruit, nothing wet and actively decomposing. The goal is a cool, stable microclimate, not a compost pile. Top the structure with 3 to 5 flat stones or pieces of untreated bark, arranged so gaps remain between them. You want the interior to stay dim and accessible, not sealed shut. Finish with a 2-inch border of straw mulch around the perimeter. Standley Premium Western Forage sells compressed straw bales starting around $12 at most farm supply stores, and 1 bale covers multiple modules easily. Now the detail most people skip, the hunting corridor. Between the shelter and the crop bed, you need a continuous strip of moist, covered ground, 6 to 12 inches wide, mulched with straw or bark, with no bare dry gap. Ground beetles don't cross open, desiccated soil well. If there's a dry gravel path or exposed dirt between the shelter and the lettuce, the predator stays near the shelter and the slugs stay near the lettuce. The corridor closes that gap. After 7 days, lift 1 stone or piece of bark and check what's underneath. You're not looking for beetles yet. You're diagnosing the microclimate. No moisture at all means the location is too exposed. Add more leaf litter and move it slightly into shade. Smell of rot and a cluster of slugs means too much wet organic material. Remove the decomposing layer. Reduce straw thickness. Add dry bark for ventilation. Roly-polies, small spiders, and worm activity are positive signs. The microclimate is stabilizing, and the right inhabitants are starting to move in. Don't touch it again for another week after that. The instinct to check daily and rearrange things is exactly what resets the process every time. The structure is built. The corridor is in place. Now comes the part that determines whether this was worth doing. And most people get it completely wrong. They either expect the shelter to perform like a pesticide and declare it useless after 4 days, or they never measure anything at all and have no idea whether it helped or not. Both approaches waste the whole experiment. Before you build anything, spend 5 minutes establishing a baseline on 1 target bed. Count the damaged leaves on 10 plants. Lift a flat board or a piece of burlap that's been sitting on the soil overnight and count how many slugs are sheltering under it in the morning. Note how many plants show active aphid clusters. Write it down with the date. That's your 0 point. Without it, you have nothing to compare against in 30 days, and you'll be making decisions based on feeling instead of observation. Day 7 is a construction check, not a results check. You already know what to look for under the stones. What you're also checking at this point is whether the hunting corridor is still intact. Straw hasn't blown away, The soil beneath it is still slightly moist. Nothing has disturbed the edge between the shelter and the bed. Day 14 is the first real read. Lift the control board again. Compare the slug count to day 0. Check new leaf damage, not the old ragged holes, which are already there, but fresh cuts on leaves that were intact a week ago. If new damage has slowed, something is working in the vicinity. If slug count under the board has increased, that means you've made slug habitat more visible and concentrated, which is actually useful. It tells you exactly where to intervene with a targeted handful of Sluggo Plus bait, rather than broadcasting it across the whole bed. Day 30 is your first honest verdict. Compare new damage rates, slug counts, aphid presence, and, critically, how many times you reached for a spray bottle or a bait bag. If that number dropped even partially, the shelter is contributing. A gardener spending $20 to $40 a month on bonide copper fungicide, insecticidal soap, and slug bait during peak season, who skips even 2 applications, has recovered the cost of the entire shelter in 1 month. 2 things will likely surprise you. First, the aphid reduction, if it happens, won't look like beetles climbing the plants. It'll look like fewer fresh colonies establishing on new growth, because ground-active predators are taking aphids at soil level, intercepting the cycle before it builds. Research from Scottish Agronomy notes that ground beetles and rove beetles patrol the soil surface actively, but rarely move into the plant canopy, meaning their effect on aphids is real, but indirect. They reduce the population that's cycling through the ground phase, not the one already established 6 inches up the stem. Second, if slug numbers under your control board actually increase in week 1, don't panic. It means the shelter is concentrating them into a visible, trackable location. That's information. Use it to make one precise intervention instead of treating the whole garden. What you're building with this 30-day log isn't just data. It's the argument for whether to scale up, stay at 1 module, or adjust placement. That decision should come from the numbers on the page, not from whether the garden looks tidier. 1 module proves the concept. 3 modules start to change the garden. But the real shift happens when you stop thinking about beetle shelters as objects you place and start thinking about the entire perimeter of your garden as habitat infrastructure, a connected system where predators can overwinter, spread, and maintain pressure across multiple beds through an entire growing season. The limit of a single shelter is straightforward: its patrol zone. A ground beetle typically hunts within roughly 3 to 10 feet of its daytime cover. 1 module placed at the north edge of your lettuce bed does almost nothing for the strawberries, 15 feet away, or the pepper starts on the opposite side of the garden. If slug damage is showing up in 3 different spots, you need coverage in 3 different spots, not a bigger pile in 1 corner. The practical upgrade is 3 modules positioned at the problem points, connected by mulched corridors. 1 near the leafy greens, 1 along the wet edge where slugs typically enter from, a lawn border, a compost area, a shaded fence line. 1 near any young transplants or seedlings, which are the highest value targets for both slugs and aphids and the hardest to recover once damaged. Total material cost if you're sourcing logs and leaves from your own yard: under 20, mostly for a bale of straw. Total build time: 2 to 3 hours across a weekend. The next layer, and this is where the annual savings become meaningful, is stopping the practices that reset the predator population every season: tilling the bed edges, raking every fallen leaf in fall, treating the whole garden with a broad-spectrum spray when one bed has a problem. Each of those actions doesn't just clean the garden, it destroys the overwintering sites, the egg chambers, and the shelter network that ground beetles built up through the season. You spend spring rebuilding a predator population that you eliminated in October. Long-term beetle bank studies confirm this. The structures that maintain carabid diversity year over year were the ones left undisturbed through winter, not cleaned up and rebuilt each spring. Add 1 more element, and the system becomes nearly self-sustaining. A narrow, flowering strip along one edge of the garden. Not a meadow, a 12-inch wide band of botanical interests low-growing, alyssum, phacelia, or dill left to flower. This doesn't feed ground beetles directly, but it supports parasitic wasps and hoverflies that handle the aphid colonies already established on plant stems, the ones ground predators can't easily reach. The 2 systems work different layers of the same problem. At full scale, 3 shelters, mulched corridors, undisturbed edges, one flowering strip. A gardener who was spending $60 to $100 per season on Sluggo, benign sprays, replacement transplants, and repeat applications can realistically cut that by half. Not because every pest disappears, but because the threshold for intervention moves. Instead of treating at the first sign of damage, you treat when the predator network fails to hold the line, which, in a functioning system, happens far less often. That's the actual value of the $30 insect hotel. Not a miracle, not zero slugs forever. A permanent shift in who does the night shift in your garden, and who stays on the shelf at the store.